Mrs. Tillman do that this morning? What is that about? That's
She's responsible for the shirt.
Okay.
I found the green tie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the work session, December 5th. The first item on the agenda is our audit presentation. Mr. Cordry, I will turn it over to you. You can introduce the guests, and we may proceed.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much. I'll move up here so we can close the personal. So Pam Baker, partner with Barbicane Thornton and Company, here to review the results of the audit. Also with me is Eric Willie. Eric was the supervisor on your account this year and has worked on your account for the past few years. And so he is here to answer any questions. But I'm going to go through the results of the audit with you. We handed out, before we started the meeting this afternoon, a draft copy of the actual audit report, a draft of the single audit report, and a draft of our letter of recommendations. Okay, I'm going to go through the audit report first, just focus on some of the highlights. But if you have a question, please interrupt us, please ask, as we go through. I'm not going to go through every page. I'm going to try to give you overall a sense of the results of the audit so that, you can be rest assured as council that what you have before you as a draft is in good order and we should be able to have finals ready for next week, okay? But just in case there's any questions or any changes. Prior to today's meeting, Keith and his staff have had an opportunity to review this. And so from their perspective, I think they're satisfied that everything in here is as it should be. Having said that, so if you start with that thick one first of all, and I'm going to ask you to go to pages 2, 3, and 4, which of course is the independent auditor's report. So what this is going to tell you is that the financial statements are the responsibility of management. Last year we talked about the fact that Keith had been working with your accounting system, Munis, to track and map your accounting system to your financial statements. Last year was the first year. We made it. It was a little rough going. This year, the process went much more smoothly, and he was able to tweak it as opposed to building it. And so kept everybody on track. And so when we say that these financial statements were prepared by management, they truly were. Of course, it's our responsibility to make sure that they are correct and that they're fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and to audit those financial statements in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and generally accepted government auditing standards, which means that we need to look not only at the numbers and what underlies them in terms of transactions and support for transactions, but also that there's compliance, okay, with any legal mandates or anything that would affect the numbers, that you're in compliance with that as well. So at the top of page 3, you'll see our opinions. And you'll see that our opinions are unmodified, or what we commonly refer to as a clean audit opinion. And that audit opinion covers all of the financial statements, the entity-wide statements, which are full accrual, the fund statements, which are modified accrual, the budgetary statement, and the enterprise fund statements. You'll also notice right after that, the section in the middle called emphasis of matter. This year, the city implemented a new GASB pronouncement that had to do with fair value measurement of investments. It had no impact on your financials themselves in terms of the valuation of your investments. You carry your investments at fair value already. This just affected disclosures. So if you looked at the disclosures and the footnotes from last year to this year, you will see additional information about how your investments are valued, okay? For the city, that again does not have significant impact because, as you know, you really are very limited in what you can invest your funds in anyway, so you don't have a lot of risk there. But for those governments who might be invested in derivatives and things of that nature, it would be important, to have more information on that. The second paragraph under emphasis of matter also discusses a prior period adjustment, okay? This was discovered during the year, and I'm just going to take a pause here to say, if last year the focus was on getting the accounting system to map to financial statements, this year the effort that Keith and his staff, and by the way, as you know, he lost a key staff this year and brought someone else in who had to learn that position as well. But monumental effort this year on two fronts. One was to track historically and moving forward, a better tracking of your capital projects matched to your bond funds. Phenomenal job. I mean, he was in touch with us all year long as each phase of it went on. So we knew by the time we got here that that was in good shape, but I'm telling you, that was a phenomenal effort. The second phenomenal effort, and this really went outside of Keith's office even to a new grants administrator person that you had on board, and again, a phenomenal job. For those of you who were here when we first started doing the audit, the very first audit, we had a material weakness because your grant fund always had a deficit fund balance. And we kept saying, this shouldn't happen, this shouldn't happen, this shouldn't happen. The grants aren't being mapped the way they should be mapped. This year, all mapped. Really, I'm so pleased to be able to tell you that this department has really mapped. And now grants management, in terms of what revenue should be coming in and where should it be spent, is just really, really good. As a result of all that work, there was a prior period adjustment to put some things in the right buckets, okay? And so that's what that refers to, because it's restated your beginning balance. But it was between funds, okay? So it wasn't like something was missing that came onto the books. So
What was the amount of that? Do you know?
it's here, 561,102.
That's the total right there?
That's the total. And it moved between funds. It moved between water and sewer and the grant fund, okay? So, everything now going forward, very much cleaned up. And in addition to that, systems in place to make sure that doesn't happen again, which I think is even more important as you talk about overall grants management. So, moving on from that, so that kind of summarizes the opinions section for you. We'll go on now to, starting with page 5, the management's discussion and analysis. And as you know, I don't typically go through this other than to say that it was prepared by management. And to the extent that there's any financial information included in this narrative, it does tie back to the financial statements, and we make sure of that. So that it all translates in the right manner if somebody wanted to go back and verify that it ties to the audited financial statements, okay? One of the things that you will see when you do have a chance to read the management's discussion and analysis, so in addition to the two things we just talked about that were huge initiatives this year, the other huge initiative this year really had to do with capital, right? So you had your project's still ongoing in water and sewer. So again, anytime you have activity like that, what that says to us as an audit firm, and when we come into audit, is, okay, you have the same staff, you have the same systems, but you have so many more transactions flowing through that system. So to us, that translates into the potential for more risk. So we tested that pretty significantly this year, okay? The spending of the debt, the recording of the debt proceeds, the recording of the expenses as it relates to that treatment plant. So just to kind of make you aware of that.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yes, please.
Because I'm
Yep.
still confused about
The prior period,
the
yep.
prior period adjustment.
Yes.
Between those two, does that make sense?
I think the specifics of what happened was that there was some activity that got reported in the grant fund that should have been in the water sewer fund, and part of it was moved, just the revenue, but not the expense, when it was reclassified by staff in the past. And then when we were cleaning the pools out, we saw that.
So it was related, but it wasn't,
Right.
Right.
You need to pull the microphone closer.
Oh, pull it like that.
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So there was it was half reclassified. In other words, when it got moved, the journal entry just moved one piece
the
of it.
revenue
And I
piece
can't
went
remember
over.
if it was the revenue or the expense offhand.
One of them went,
But one of them
didn't.
got moved, but the other piece didn't, yeah. So it's just moving from one to the other.
Okay.
And that was historically, honestly, the fact that it got boiled down to this, that was what had been happening. We kept having deficits there because there wasn't the proper matching. So the expense didn't get where it needed to be and match the revenue, even though expenses were happening and revenue was happening. But you've got to really map that and track that. So now there are sub-accounts in that grant fund ledger that track specifically which grant piece that belongs to,
So
so,
you end up with a delivery ticket and the purchase order.
there you go.
Exactly. Well, what,
To
when
put
the-
it in simple terms.
Yeah, exactly.
when we were cleaning the pools out, that became a discrepancy.
Right.
it
So
was
that's
just-
where that's
Kind
how
of like
you-
if you don't clean the closet out,
Right.
you wouldn't know your baseball cap was in the corner. You know, it's like, simple terms like that.
Great perspective.
That's
Yeah.
even easier than the shipping tag and the purchase order.
So I don't even know where that.
I got that one.
I'm wondering where that came from, because I've never used anything similar to that.
Okay.
Okay, are we good there?
We're good there
Okay, we're
now.
good there. So now we're
Yeah.
going to, as I mentioned, we touched on the management's discussion and analysis. Let's go to page 13. Okay, so pages 13 and 14 are those full accrual statements, okay, which as we know, that's where everything lives, all right? So this is not just your general fund, it's not just your water and sewer, it's not just the grant, but this is where everything lives. And it lives here on a full accrual basis. One of the biggest things probably to point out here, because most of this activity does flow forward from your day-to-day operations. So things like cash and investment balances, they're not going to be any different than what you've been seeing, you know, based on any reporting that you had prior to the annual audit. But you will see that your capital assets, your non-current assets, are on this statement. That's all of your capital. So that's your physical structure. It's also your infrastructure. Here's where you pick up that huge project ongoing. If you look at construction in progress, right under non-current assets, you've got in total $41 million of projects that are in process. And so, you know, that's going to build your capital and your infrastructure, but that's a lot that's still ongoing. Under the liabilities section, the one thing I guess to really note here, this is the second year of your net pension liability. So if you look under liabilities, under the non-current liabilities section, or if you look to the next to the biggest number, the biggest one being your bonds and notes, which that money's going into capital, so that's very tangible. But right above that, your net pension liability, as you know from participating in the pool, you're picking up the unfunded piece, which is $29.5 million. The pension plan itself went from last year being funded at 71.87% to 68.78%. If you want to flag that, it's on page 60, but just so you see the swing that's happening, you know, with the slightest move of the pension activity, because there's such big numbers. So page 60 will, eventually you'll see a 10-year trend here on your pension numbers. See where it says the funded percentage there? So the funded percentage went down, which means your liability is going to go up. So hopefully when you have an opportunity to see a 10-year trend there, it will, you know, give even more input. Because as of right now, you don't have a lot of input in what's happening with those investments, right? So, all right, so coming back to page 13, the reason I pointed that out is because if you look under your net position section, you've got an unrestricted deficit of $26.8 million. It's being driven by that pension liability, okay? So your capital investment net of debt is strong because you're borrowing and putting it right into capital assets. So as you pay down the debt and depreciate the assets, that should stay pretty steady. But that deficit's gonna sit there as long as that pension plan is not funded. And as mentioned earlier, and what was in our management letter, you know, just by way of FYI, and I think you've been speaking recently about the post-employment benefits, in 2 years' time, that whole liability is gonna come on here as well. So that's just gonna continue to drive the unrestricted deficit. Okay. Any questions?
Well, isn't that,
Yeah.
the post-employment benefits, isn't that?
You have a portion of it, The pension, the OPEB liability, a few years ago, GASB issued a statement that said, start picking up 1 year at a time, and you did that. But now there's another GASB statement that says, stop picking up 1 year at a time because you had a historic when you start, and just pick it all up. So that's just gonna
the whole
grow.
thing's gonna hit
The whole thing's gonna hit, the difference, yeah.
But it won't have any real
Cash impact,
cash
No,
impact
no.
until
Right.
Mr. Day goes to the bond.
right. That's where,
That's where the
That's where-
potential
that's
is
where
to have to
the-
explain that, right,
to explain it and then say,
right.
So no real practical application at all.
Until
until we go there. So
And the potential
who in
is
the
that they
bond people knows the people in Gatsby is my question. No,
Well-
I say this in all seriousness, the
No, you-
council president, I'm very much interested on where the municipal government has the ability to ask these questions and push back on these things that mean nothing to the operating day-to-day. You could have all this back, Pam, you tell me what's unrestricted and restricted surplus, tell me what your suggestions are at the back, and
Right.
I'm done.
Right.
Except this, which I had to agree to reduce benefits the other day, but I'll let you continue.
Okay. I appreciate your comments. I'm sorry I don't have answers to that, right?
Could you pass them on to the imaginary person, or at least leave me a name and number I could call
Right, right.
on behalf of our employees?
So, moving to page 14, if anybody has any additional questions, but page 14 is just, again, the full accrual perspective of your expenses minus your revenues. And so, we're gonna look at this a little bit closer with the fund perspectives, but if you just wanna look at the change in net position, so your net position for all your governmental activities this year, 3 lines from the bottom, changed positively by 572,000. So if you were gonna look at yourselves like a business and measure all it takes to run your business outside of the water and sewer, okay, you had a net of about 572,000. So we've got depreciation in there, we've got interest on your debt in there, so pretty good financial position, given that we've got an unrestricted deficit, right? So not too bad. The business type activities had a plus of 9.6, but of course, most of that is because you had grants, money coming in to the tune of $9.5 million because of the capital construction, okay? So that's kind of inflating that. That's not, we'll see a little bit later where the true change from operations is. So that's what's driving that right now. So now let's look for a second at the general fund. If I can get you to go to, let's just look at the balances at the end of the year, which I believe is page 15. So page 15, you've got, of course, your general fund, and I'll just say here that we did not, as a result of our audit procedures, detect any material misstatements or mistakes or audit adjustments. And so what's being reflected here in any reporting you've had from Keith and his department, whether it be building a budget or looking at what your fund balance is, should be consistent with what's in the audit report, because we didn't find any material misstatements, okay? So looking at your general fund, okay, the fund balance section, so you've got your you had some prepaid expenses, so that's kind of set aside out of your fund balance because you've prepaid those. Some committed, some assigned, and then your unassigned fund balance is at about $7.5 million. Overall, your fund balance had a slight increase this year, which we'll see on page 17. It increased by about $278,000. Sorry, I skipped 2 pages, page 17. It increased by about $278,000, which I think is consistent again with what Keith has reported out. So against your $34.4 million budget, you came in pretty close. I don't know that I would have wanted to be much closer than that, but you did manage to add to your fund balance a little bit, okay? Just back on page 15 for a minute to look at your capital improvements fund. Of course, maintaining a general fund balance, I think we've talked about this before, is important, but you want to balance that because that's a little bit more short-term, right? And what you really need is to also look at long-term. Long-term builds in things like your capital improvements fund, where you're able to take money on a regular basis, put it into capital so that you're not always necessary and needing to go to the bond market when maybe you have capital needs. If you can slowly build up, then you have some leverage there. Whether it's leverage to spend there and not go to the bond market, or whether it's leverage to explain, and get your bond rating where, it needs to be from the bond rating perspective. So overall, your balance sheet for your governmental funds looks good, okay? Let's touch on the proprietary funds. Okay, for that, I'm going to ask you to go to page 19. Okay, so these are your water and sewer, of course, Mitchell Landing, which we do a separate audit in accordance with the requirements of the state, and that's already been submitted. And I can tell you from their audit, they had no issues this year. They had no findings, no recommendations. You use a management company, and they do a good job with that. And then you had some small funds, one of which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But look at the water and sewer fund. So we already talked about the fact that, as you know, the water and sewer fund, we took our hits a few years ago, right? We had the project, we had some big losses there. We settled all of our lawsuits. We got beyond that, and now we're back into regular construction phase, things moving as they should. And so you'll see that in the water and sewer fund, your net investment in capital at the bottom at 36 million, that's indicative of us building back up. Pre-depreciation, we're borrowing money, but we're putting it right into capital. The restricted funds are for capital, right? And you've got a slight deficit there, but once again, the water and sewer funds are picking up 3.7 million of a pension liability because there are employees in there that belong to the pension. Okay, so that's why it looks like there's a deficit.
Gotcha.
Probably more importantly is to look at page 20 to see, so if we strip away that we've got this huge capital project and we strip away things like that pension and just look at the net operating income. So the water and sewer fund had an operating income of $476,000. Now for a proprietary fund, that's going to be really important because remember here we're trying to not just cover the cost of providing water and sewer, but we have to maintain our systems. So you've got to have something going into the bottom line for, the repair, the main that breaks, the pump that fails, it's not quite like a pothole where we can defer it if we have to, but, these types of things, you really do need, equity to cover those. So the water and sewer fund, is that enough? I don't know. With a brand new system, probably not long term. You're probably going to have to revisit once your system is fully in place and engaged. What rates should be. That's normally the progression when you have that type of construction. Any questions on this? I don't want to go too fast. I want to go fast enough. Okay. All right. Beyond that, we have page 22 is just your healthcare trust. That's, all investments and your agency funds, which are just funds you're holding for others, okay, like escrows and that sort of thing. So nothing real big to point out there. Starting on page 24 are your footnotes. These just summarize those significant accounting policies and then offer some detailed information on certain notes or certain numbers. On page 28 in the footnotes, remember we talked about the fair value disclosures? That's here under investments. That's what that new GASB said. This is how you value your investments. And so just for those of you who are going to go back and compare everything in this one to everything in last year's, that'll be different, okay? Moving on through the financial statement footnotes, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on those. I would like to touch on, not to just keep bringing up a bad, unpleasant topic, but on page 52, we talked about that OPEB. So right now, to date, you've recorded about $21 million of OPEB liability. On page 52 are the results of your most recent actuarial study. So if you were to book the whole thing would be the $26.2 million on that first low, the unfunded AAL. So you've booked all but about $5 million. Now you'll have another valuation under the new rules before, so this will most likely change, but just for perspective, okay?
Will we have that before the budget?
Well, when she said it might change, it might because we're doing a plan redesign,
Right.
so. it
Oh, I
depends-
gotcha.
it
Because they
depends.
recalculate, they would recalculate based on what we.
Correct.
We've already, I think, we've already got the report for next year.
I
They
understand.
calculate 2
I
years at
gotcha.
a time.
Yeah, 2 years at a time.
But if we don't make any changes, we've got
Gotcha.
it. If we make some changes, they'll
Okay.
Right.
recalculate.
And it won't affect your funding, okay? So it's not gonna affect what you're paying, because you do pay as you go, right? So you're paying, back to your point, you're paying what it costs, not against what this liability
Right.
is, okay?
Yeah. Just a sign, yes, we are paying it, we are
Yes.
paying that liability that we have.
As it
every
comes
year
to,
for
yeah,
it.
absolutely, absolutely. The benefits that are
You take
due,
my yes sign with you when you go to
the
vote.
benefits that you have, you're paying, correct. Okay, the other thing is, if you look on page 53, just for perspective, okay? So we've talked about the CIP and the construction in progress that you have. Note 11, which starts at the bottom of page 53 and goes up to page 54, gives an outstanding analysis of the commitments, okay? So far, for governmental activities, you spent $7 million, I'm on the top of page 54, out of a project amounts of 8.4. So the projects that you have going on governmental-wide, you've got still about 1.4 outstanding commitment-wise. For the water and sewer projects, you've spent 31.9 out of 76 million in total commitments. So your commitment is 44.1 million still to finish. So, we're about not quite halfway finished, okay, with that project. So that will continue to be an area in the next year, that we will look at closely. So we look at all of those contracts. We test them. If there are any bid requirements, we test bid requirements. We also look at things like change orders, if there are change orders, to see, if change orders are reasonable to the project, that someone didn't come in and give you a price, and then next thing you know, you've got change order. So we test that. We test the payments. We test that retainage is properly handled. So there was a lot of work that Eric did in looking at that. Okay, any questions on footnotes?
No.
Okay. Then moving beyond that, beginning with page 57 is just additional detailed information. Okay, it's the budget broken down. It's that pension data broken down. The next thing I'd really like to look at is on page 69. If I can get you to go to page 69. Now, I made reference earlier to the other funds, and I said we'll talk about that in a little bit. And I also spoke earlier about the grant fund, which for years ran a deficit balance. The grant fund you see here now is fully tracked to every single grant that you have out there. So,
Based on the new process that was.
yes, so if you've been awarded a grant and money was spent under that grant, but you didn't get the money yet, the receivables been recorded, so the revenue and the expenditure are matching. The deficit's gone, because at the end of the day, after going through all of that activity, going way back, fortunately, at the end of the day, there was a little more money in there than could be tracked. So you, not only do you have a perfect tracking, but you've got a little cushion, okay, just in case something comes in, that's from way back. So I just kind of wanted to point that out for you. That's what that means, okay? And on page 70, you can see the volume. The other good thing here is you can see on page 70, because one of the things that Keith did as he worked through this was come at it from a perspective of what's the grant fund and what should be in the grant fund, and can we get everything in there? So it's a great way to see what's funding from grants, right? So you've got $2.3 million of grant monies that came in, this past year. So, important, not only good that it was being tracked better, that's important. Yeah, that's a lot of money. So, again, good job on the grant funds.
We probably should also point out about the change in the column,
Yeah, the new one. Yeah, the new one, the community development. Yeah, so now what's happening as projects come up or different initiatives come up, Keith can make a call to say,
Warrant a separate.
Yeah, does it warrant a separate accounting? And some of them really do make more sense, even if it's just an internal tracking, so that kind of separate it, if you want to add add to that.
Yeah, so last year we had community development, so the similarity is in the name, but this is the new project fund that was set up to develop for housing redevelopment. So we wanted to isolate that to let the stakeholders have a good look at it. And then the traditional community development activities that Debbie Stam oversees has been merged into the grant fund. So used to, that had the same location. So when you see that, and you looked at last year, we'd be comparing apples and oranges.
Right.
Yeah, just
You
wanted to make
can't
that
put
clear.
them side by side.
Yeah, because we merged the old community development into the grant fund, because it's just a relatively small grant. And this is something we're all wanting to monitor and understand, so we wanted to put that out there for all the stakeholders to have a good look at it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think that community development is more than just grants. It says there's other activity going there. And so it's like a real special revenue fund. There could be sort of contributions and things going into it. Okay. Any questions before we go to the single audit and then the letter of recommendations? Any questions on the big report? Okay. Just going to touch briefly on the next one, the one that says single audit report, if you have that one. Okay, so this year was the second year of your audit being done in accordance with the uniform guidance, which were new federal regulations. In order to see a summary of this, I'm going to ask you to look on page 9. Page 9 is going to summarize what's included in terms of reports in this section, okay? So page 9, you're looking for no responses here, okay? So on page 9, first of all, we already talked about the fact that you had an unmodified auditor's report. That's the very first bullet there. So the feds, when they will get this report, and what they want to see is that not only are you managing their money, but that you've got a good financial audit on all of your financials. The next one deals with internal control over financial reporting. This is where, remember we talked about the audit done in accordance with government auditing standards. As a result of that, we have to issue a report that says that there are internal controls over the financial activities, from a financial perspective and a compliance perspective, okay? So if there was non-compliance with the law that could affect your financials, we would have to report that. So we have to test for that. So you had no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies, and no non-compliance. But now because you spend in excess of $750,000 of federal money, we have to also test specifically internal controls over managing those federal awards, okay? So for you, this year, that was the Clean Water State Revolving Funds, because that's all that money coming in for the project. So when I talked about, we looked at it from a financial risk perspective, we also have to test for compliance. For example, you're not allowed to use a contractor that's been suspended or debarred by the feds. We have to test compliance for that. And so that's where this report comes into play. And once again, we didn't have any findings, and you had a clean report there, okay? The threshold for your federal programs was $750,000. This year, you did not qualify as a low-risk auditee simply because we had a prior finding, but it's been resolved. And so next year, you'll be back on track. Yeah, it's a 2-year look back, okay? So the next page talks about that from last year, the grant program finding, right? And so this year, as we've talked about, much better, everything's being tracked the way it should be, so that finding is no longer applicable, okay? That's a summary of the single audit. Any questions?
Yeah.
Now the skinny one.
My favorite.
Okay, so these are just recommendations, okay? So these aren't findings in the sense that they indicate weaknesses in internal controls. They're recommendations, okay? We've talked in the past about credit card controls. There still is just one credit card, but Keith still is working on a P-card system. That's not quite up and running yet, so we'll continue to address that.
It's a priority.
Good.
High priority.
It's a priority.
Aye.
Priority. I like the one card. I think that's great.
Great.
I think it's great that people have to come and ask for it. I think it's great that they have to reconcile in the budget for it. It's great that it comes back up to the mayor's office and the mayor reconciles it. I think it's great. all these employees in all these departments, mom or dad should have one credit card. So, I like that. I'm glad you have the recommendation again, and as years past, you've written it several times, and I have said, I like the one credit card. I think it's great.
Okay. Thank you for your input. The next one had to do with account reconciliations. We talked last year about accounts on the trial balance that although maybe not material, were not being reconciled. That recommendation's resolved. Everything was reconciled this year, a lot of effort put in the GL this year. And so we found that to be resolved. Under current year, this year we did a detailed controls test over payroll. We test control cycles, detailed testing, transactional testing on a cyclical basis, okay? And this year we picked payroll, and so we did a detailed test. Now, from an internal control perspective, the checks and balances to process payroll, we found no issues with those, but we also test compliance, okay? And we did find instances where I-9s were not up to date and in people's files, so that's something to work on, just being sure that all of those files are up to date. That can happen when you've had employees for a long period of time, but it is the law. You need to be sure that we're compliant with having I-9s on file. And then the very last thing on the next is not really it's just an FYI, as we've already talked about, GASB 75, which is the other post-employment benefits. So that's just an FYI to know that's coming, but I know that you've already been kind of addressing that and talking about it. So that is it. I think that's the fewest findings we've ever had. Recommendations, I should say.
Well, that's great news, obviously, and thank you for your effort. I know you put a lot of time and effort into it. Does anyone have any questions? Any other questions? Mr. Mayor, you have a comment?
Well, I just want to add, well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate our continued relationship and partnership. But I really do want to just, once again, call attention to, and every year as we make forward progress, year after year after year, Keith Cordry and his team.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just doing a fantastic job.
Yeah.
Well, we have a great team. There's a lot of people down there, so it's
Yeah.
fair to make sure that's,
Well, you know the buck stops there,
yeah.
so we know it too. So. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
We'll see you next week with
Yep.
finals.
Yep.
Pam, if you have a name and number, I would appreciate that. Good Lord, Pam. Okay, that's fine. I'll get it from you next week. When you come back, that's fine. That'll help me, that'll give me a time to draft my paragraph and letter.
Okay, I can do that for you.
Mr. Molds, you're up.
Good evening, all.
Good evening. How are you,
sir.
Mike?
What we've got for your consideration this meeting is a proposal to close a section of North Division Street. This topic came up as a result of the work on the War Memorial renovation project. I think you've seen those brochures for information.
Yep.
One of the things, and as part of the renovation, were discussions about how to bring the memorial back into some prominence and opportunities to have some events there. As you know, the War Memorial over at the Civic Center does a big Veterans Day, and they have the room and the parking to do that. But we'd like to maybe find some other types of smaller events so that we could have some recognition of the memorial as, again, a memorial to the people who have lost their lives serving our country. As part of that discussion, it came up as where a parking problem, to have enough room for people to come and park. And topics came in terms of how to handle maybe some more parking on North Division Street. We looked at a couple things going one way, and obviously the other discussion was about closing it. The discussions with the committee was in favor of trying to close that. We also had some input from the property owners along that stretch, notably Knock Insurance, which, you know, Emily's here. A few questions are her, Delmarva Power Sports, and Renman's the auto service that are right there that affected. So the other thing that came up is, as we talk to those property owners that see what goes on, is the number of people that drive very fast down that stretch. Basically, people like to use that to bypass the traffic signal.
Absolutely.
And the times we've been out there, it is very noticeable with that. The other problem you have coming from the other direction, up from Priscilla Street, is people will try to avoid the traffic signal to be able to get on Route 13 a lot quicker. And as you know, that's a very tight angle. The viewing where that traffic's coming is dangerous. You know, you want an intersection to come at a 90-degree angle, so it's a lot easier to see traffic in both directions. But people, amazingly, just to try to avoid 30 seconds sticking a traffic light, will it literally take their life in their hands doing that. So one of the proposals we wanted to do was to close that section. Now, North Division Street, if you remember, used to be a state under the Roads Commission in terms of that. And then when they built the expressway and they modified it, that's there. So with Donnie Drewer's pending retirement, what we wanted to do was try to get that in front of him and try to get a decision on that. We've talked to Donnie, he's in support of it. He's willing to sign off on doing that to be able to close it so that we can make these improvements on that. So what we've got is the SHA on board. We have the businesses on board that would be affected right there in terms of proceeding with doing that. So the sketch that we laid out was to kind of show how we would enclose that area and make a connection to the island, which is the War Memorial site.
This is the same one.
Yes, exactly the same one there. So to try to illustrate that, we're providing accesses to the two businesses, but essentially what would happen, anybody coming up Decatur would turn to go down North Division and then tie into Priscilla and use the traffic light to safely get out on Route 13. It's not an abandonment, it's a closure. The reason we did it that way is because trying to determine who owns what kind of thing in that area with State Highway, it can get kind of messy because this goes back to the old Roads Commission and whatnot. We even have researched the old sketch of what that looked like in 1941. Go back in time in terms of that part of the city. So that's the proposal that we're looking at. We've talked to the property owners with this sketch to show them what's there. And again, I think we've got support on that.
I will tell you from experience, Mr. Boda and I can both tell you, yesterday, driving to the parade, there was a gentleman who came from 13 heading north and was going about, my guess would be 60 miles an hour, proceeded to take the cutoff, proceeded to make and I'll use the term liberally, a California stop at the stop sign, and made a right-hand turn, and
Is that not a New Jersey stop? I'm sorry, I thought that's what it was called. I meant, no offense.
New Jersey, you can't turn left.
yeah, I mean, it's been, every time you go by there, every time I drive by there, you see people just shooting down. It's amazing that we haven't had more issues there, but, does anyone have any questions about it?
Yeah, the only one concern I have, and I'm supportive of this, although my wife is not, because we do live on Decatur. It's one of her little favorite shortcuts.
You're right there.
Classic. Sometimes we do have tractor trailers that drive down Decatur Avenue to deliver. And there's parking on both sides of the street. I don't know if, I'm just hoping that we can, first off, I think it's gonna cut down on the number of trucks that come up and down Decatur Avenue because I think really the only one that really should be going down here is delivered to the Dept Power Sports. So, hopefully they can, come down and then go out there on North Division instead of trying to turn around and come back down Decatur Avenue. But and that's one thing I'm hopeful that this will do is cut down on that.
That's a good point.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, my little turn off when I was, really, it was my turn. If I were to go back to Middle Neck to keep from staying on the highway, I would take that little venture back go across Priscilla and go around on, is it Priscilla Street? What goes around there?
Hammond.
Hammond's,
Hammond
yeah, it's
Street.
one of them.
I would just take it, I mean, and I'm kinda like, it's gonna mess me up, but,
Mike, is there any thought of, if you're not doing what Councilwoman Jackson was doing, and you go to the light and you take a right-hand turn, and then you are trying to get on to where Hammond comes around,
Yeah,
with the way that Priscilla sort of
Peels off.
peels off, does that,
it
do
does.
we have any,
get cleaned up.
and my only other question, and I'm for it, was if you had any accident reports from the police department about the particular intersection?
That, if you're interested, we can follow up for
well, you
that
know
with
what, I'm
you.
gonna tell you, it's dangerous.
Yeah.
It is very dangerous because it's hard seeing to your right.
Yeah.
To see what traffic does come. I
Yeah.
can honestly say that, because I have to pull up a little further than I should be out,
Right.
just to
see.
see if traffic's coming. So I will, I'll be truthful, so.
You know, we've got a couple of these, situations like this with these
Yeah.
triangles
Yeah.
around town.
Yep.
Kind of where the highways have carved through town. It's not the
You know,
only
people
one.
gonna always take the easiest route anyway, whether it's dangerous or what, and sometimes they know it's dangerous and still take it, but I was one. So, I have no problem with agreeing.
We have consensus to move forward?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, thank you very much.
thank you, Mike, appreciate it.
I don't know if you have any questions for Emily or?
Emily, any comments?
We're in full support of it, so our customers make chicken trying to get to our office.
Right,
So how would they, because you're Knox, right?
Yes.
How would they get to you?
They would still have access from the Priscilla Street side.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Thank you.
At some point too, once that does happen, there would be a definite disconnection between North Division Street. So one of the topics of discussion was,
Renaming.
should it have a different name to it?
Yeah.
So,
good thought.
If I could
Knock
say something
Boulevard
on the
to
name
Old
change, we would love that because nobody can find our office with it being.
Because
called
they don't
Division Street.
associate
Well,
that
there's
with North Division.
10 North Division, there's 10 Division Streets in
Right.
Salisbury.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
All right, point well taken.
thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is discussion on the council rules of order. And I'll start it by saying that I researched a bunch of things on the internet, and I'm more confused now than I was when I started.
You will be, because I dropped it. Robert's rule.
There's only several things that are consistent. And the one thing that is consistent that I saw was a conflict of interest, a definite conflict of interest is when someone can profit personally from a decision that's made on a vote. Every reference that I had that in it. The other ones are all over the place. I want to hear what your other comments about.
I think also, I saw the same thing that you saw in the research, but also, a lot of it, when you see as the abstaining, and then someone, not saying anything at a vote, traditionally counts as a no vote.
Right.
So that's unless there's a situation where it's, I guess the word is pecuniary, or financial, or financial gain, or
Yeah.
or financial interest in the decision, so, and that's standard and even on the current Robert Rules of Order, the official one.
The other thing that was stated in every case was that just because you have a conflict of interest doesn't exclude you from voting. You can always vote, even if you have a perceived conflict of interest. And-
Putting yourself in that.
And right, and then you put yourself in a position, if challenged, to go to the Ethics Commission. But it doesn't preclude you from voting. And that was consistent all the way through all the information that I looked up as well. Mr. Arton, any comments? Or?
No, I was just wondering, were we focusing on the conflict of interest thing due to what happened to us the other night?
Yeah.
Well, I think
There was,
there was
we
some
were asked to
confusion.
do that
Right.
based on the fact that everybody was uncomfortable with some of the way that it went down, so. And actually, we had somebody from the audience was confused by it and wanted to get a clarification. I will say this, and I hope this is taken the right way. We were elected to make decisions and vote, and that's a personal thing for each of us that we have to go through. And I think we owe that to our constituents to do it as often as we possibly can. And I would think personally about declaring a conflict of interest or not voting on something unless I was benefiting from it in some way, shape, or form. That's my personal opinion. But I think we owe it to the constituents to vote when a vote is called. But that, again, is a personal decision everyone has to make. So what's everyone's pleasure?
I mean, do we want to add a paragraph in there on the voting and maybe just take it directly from Robert's rules?
It was actually saying
Or do we
that
just,
not voting, abstaining from voting is just, from what I'm reading, what I read earlier, is basically what you said, abstaining from voting is giving the other party the right to vote for you, actually.
Right? Yeah, it's essentially a no vote. And it really becomes, when there's a majority, or when there's a tie,
Yeah,
it becomes a no vote.
yeah.
And that's mentioned in all the documentation. I'm not sure if we need anything, personally. Another, Do we
Doesn't
need-
affect me at all, but, one thing pointing out, I mean, the rules are clear that Robert's rules are to be used.
right,
If there's a lack of clarity, and Robert's rules are where the references to, if you have a conflict of interest, based on the definitions you've talked about, you have to declare it the moment you know it. You can't, wait until the last minute and say, oh,
Because it says.
conflict. It's
Directly
it's
affects
clear
you
that you have,
personally
the moment you know
or
it. you have to declare it.
monetarily.
yeah.
And then, this,
Well, I don't know, are we talking about Mr. Rudicel's vote right now? Are we working our
No,
way
and
around it?
we're trying to avoid something like that coming up from before.
Well, I
Because it's a
don't-
procedural thing. The declaration of a conflict of interest should be the first thing that's done before any discussions take place.
So if he had declared beforehand
Not
that he
an
had a
issue.
conflict of interest, he
Not-
still would have been able to vote the way he
Yeah,
voted?
yeah.
So I'm not exactly sure what we're talking about.
Well, that's why
Yeah,
it's covered in Robert's rules.
right.
It's a personal decision. And it has to fall into the definition of pecuniary. Or, I think the second one was, you're standing in the community, whatever that means. And I don't know what that means, to be honest with you.
Could I add something too?
Sure.
I think I recall it being done in the past that a conflict has been declared and no one had a problem with it, and I can't recall whether it was Ms. Cohen and then she voted, but she did disclose it and,
Ms. Mitchell
Move
as well.
forward,
Both
maybe.
cases in the last few
Okay.
years, Ms.
Okay,
Mitchell and Ms.
maybe.
Cohen.
Yeah, I do recall one time Ms. Cohen actually left the room when they were discussing something.
she just totally recused
Yeah,
herself
there
from the
was some- I do
discussion.
recall that.
Yes, I kind of do too.
And then I think there was one
I don't
on,
know what it was.
I think there was an abstention on the Lord's Prayer vote a few years ago.
You're right.
So when they removed that.
Good,
that-
yeah.
So,
So it's still up to the person to
Yeah.
decide whether or not they.
Right.
And I don't think. you
I
need
don't
anything.
think, I just personally don't think to add something is gonna clarify anything.
No, it's not.
I mean,
I think it's
Because
just up to
every
us to make sure
situation's
that we
different.
every
have
situation is
studied
unique.
and read through Robert's rules and know our role, and I think
Yeah.
that's the,
Or is our role to decide whether or not we have a conflict of interest that applies to Robert's rules?
correct. And Robert's rules.
I don't want to read Robert's rules in order to
There's a frequently asked question thing on Robert's, if you look at his,
Right, I've seen them, I don't know what's first, is it chicken or egg? Do I read the things first, or I take into my own personal account of what I believe
I think you do both.
the,
Yeah.
I think you do both. You say, look,
I mean, I
this is the
guess
potential.
there's, you know, a situation if you own a grass cutting company and the city's gonna hire your grass cutting company and we got a vote on it. Obviously, you couldn't be a part of that vote if you were seeking the contract.
To award the-
That's
Yeah,
kinda
it
like
is
a-
Hiring him.
it is 2016, I doubt you take my grass cutting company through Jen downstairs.
What are you charging?
That's right. I feel like it's so much more difficult today, and then in our particular situation, because we are not large enough to not have these particular legal things cross one another, that I wasn't gonna vote yes anyway, because I feel
Right.
like it was a conflict of interest for that law firm to put in a bid when we know that employees who have been disgruntled go to that law firm to get that one attorney in that law firm to come back and threaten to sue the city. I didn't think it was appropriate to take that law firm's because of the general affiliation of the head lawyer with the largest property owners group in the city. I mean, to me, it would never have gotten that far, because those two things right there should disqualify you. But if it's Robert's Rules of Order that you're using, then each one of us has to take our own
Exactly.
particular situation and
Exactly.
then read the rules. I just don't want to be forced into reading the rules first and then being made to determine, having the rules to determine whether or not it's a conflict of interest for me.
Right.
I don't know. I mean,
And that's your personal choice. If you believe you have a conflict of interest.
yeah.
And it just, one thing, I think especially for a lawyer like Mr. Rudisil, it's even more complicated, because what he said was, I represent UMES. And he made reference to the disputes that his client has with that law firm. So, I mean, that's gets a little, I don't know, he may be considering personal ethical issues as well.
But
so.
see, if just, since we're talking about a specific issue, if you have, for instance, in a business, a corporate, let's say a patent attorney, and then you have legal counsel. The patent attorney, I would say, would have a rough time, unless it was due to a patent infringement that came up, to say that my company has had business with this guy if he hasn't defended them legally relative to, if you follow me? So if he, and I don't know what his role is in UMES, but if he's a Title IX, and there's other litigation that's going on with other attorneys with the institution, that complicates things.
His vote here could create a conflict for him in his job as well, which
Now-
that would be.
Now, that I think is a fair point, because what Maryland actually says on this, and if you go to the MML trainings or MACO or wherever, the Academy of Excellence trainings, I mean, they're pretty clear that none of these things are conflicts of interest as far as your vote. Only a profit is, only if you profit from the result of your vote is a conflict of interest. So just because you're, an attorney for somewhere, and you vote a certain way because you've had dealings with this, that is not a conflict of interest in terms of your vote.
Does it specify profit means solely money?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does.
Oh, that's terrible.
So-
I'm just wondering if he's a lawyer, and there are more lawyers in government than any other profession
How does
out there,
anybody
did he-
vote?
Is there a class that you guys are missing, like at the lawyer academy, like the police academy, about what to do about this? Because
Well,
it's,
but what Mark said is kind of it, which is it could create a conflict for him in his job.
And
I could see that.
Could I add something too? Okay, because in here it's saying it for personal monetary reasons. So if he had voted and been biased because he had some business with this law firm and said, nah, okay,
That's okay.
doesn't he get himself
You
into
know,
a conflict of interest
Yes.
by
No,
voting yes?
That's what I'm saying.
And no, he has every right to do that. Just as Jim explained why he voted no, he had every right to do that. So he could have, because he knows things about that firm and doesn't like it, he has every right to vote that way.
Yeah,
But that wasn't a conflict of
That's
interest for me.
right, that's correct.
That's right.
In fact, it would have been a conflict of interest for me because I feel as if my property value is devalued because of the people of this law firm. So am I losing money personally because of these people? Should I abstain? I think what the council president says is right. We all have got to go with our personal feeling about it, and
I
that's,
think he did,
yeah.
what he did.
Oh,
what he
and that's
thought was
exactly what
right.
it says, but it says the definition of a conflict of interest in terms of Maryland and your vote as an
Yeah.
elected official is only that if you would profit as a result of your vote and no other reason.
And the funny thing is, the conflict of interest is different by state, which is interesting, because if you go to, I want to say Colorado, their interpretation is entirely different,
More stringent or less stringent?
more stringent.
Wow.
just
I mean,
feel-
you really
just
have to
believe
sort
being
of-
fair and not being partial.
When you say more stringent, does that mean, if it's more stringent, does that make it less? Does that make it
Less
harder?
possible. It makes it
Less
harder.
possible to call,
Yeah,
right?
because you almost have to, you know, say, here it is, you know.
Here's
That's
the
not-
check from this law firm.
Yeah, yeah. I just think we're opening up a Pandora's box that we don't really.
Yeah, and we don't.
You know,
Actually, I was gonna make a suggestion to you all about these council rules of order. The council president is in charge of the
Oh, yeah.
meeting. And
Yeah.
to be perfectly honest with you, I mean, I lived through the times when these things became necessary, when it was raucous and it was fun and it was hard and you had to be
Do not
ready.
call it fun.
You know
It was
what?
fun. It was very fun because it made us decide who we were as people. But in all actuality, the council president is charged of this,
Yeah.
in charge of the meeting, and that council president can do whatever they want. I was gonna make a
Yes.
motion to do away with all of these rules because more rules, as Mr. Boder will tell you, make us less free. And
Mr. Ireton, I agree with you 100%.
do you really?
That's the third time.
Where's the camera?
In a week.
Yay,
Come on.
third time in a week.
No,
Yeah.
you need to be.
I thought we
it's
could get rid
on.
of them when I was.
It's on. It's on.
No, I didn't.
Okay, anything else?
No.
No, sir.
All right,
Have a good week.
have a good week. We'll see you next Monday for our
course, I was in-
last one
I was
before
in
the
room
Christmas.
when there was-
Cool.
Yep, yep.
Okay, we are adjourned.